Behold, a car named after a mighty warrior, Drax, member of the Guardian of the Galaxies.
There are two types of beings in the universe. Those who dance and those who do not.
Guardians of the Galaxies. Well, anyway. Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. I didn't look at it properly. Oh, it's Trax. Oh, okay. Wow, it sure looks familiar, doesn't it? Looks just like this other vehicle that I tested very recently. Matter of fact, I may be testing it right now and just don't realize it. This is in fact the Chevrolet version of the Buick Envista. Or the Buick Envista is the Buick version of the Chevrolet Trax. Not Drax, Trax. But you know what? I think I'll call it the Drax anyway. Are you with me on this? Let's take a look and see if there's any huge differences between these two all-new GM SUVs available only in front-wheel drive. Come with me. Say in your Chevrolet, although it has to get here first. And this is an American designed vehicle, but it is not built here. It is in fact built in South Korea, and the engine is not an American engine. It is an engine in Mexico at the GM plant in somewhere in Mexico. I forget the name of the town, but there you are. A beautiful, beautiful car, you know. And I still think, like with the Buick Envista, which this is identical to for the most part, it looks like we have a body here that's going to be completely electrified at some point, because it just looks that way to me. It has an ultra-modern look that is, I find, very pleasing. And it also has a few other things. It's very economical in terms of price of admission, and should be economical to own because it's got a very small engine in it, a 1.2-liter three-cylinder. A triple, you know, like a Triumph Bonneville of old. No, wait, did they ever have a triple? No, that's a bad example. How about the Speed Triple? That's a triple. But unlike most inline engines, instead of having a four-cylinder, it's a three-cylinder. It is, of course, as is the fashion of the times, it is turbocharged. So you have that little bitty engine which has turbocharging to increase its output, but you still have the benefit of having a very small engine so that it's economical. It uses very little fuel compared to a lot of other vehicles in this class. Or so they say. That's what the EPA value is. Is that the way it's going to be? Now, first of all, are you going to tow this trailer with this Chevrolet? No, you're not. But what you are going to do is you are going to be able to haul 4, even 5 people in it with relative comfort. You're also going to be able to haul a lot of cargo with it, because if you put the rear seats down, you have quite a bit of room. Not as much as some of the other vehicles in the class, mind you, but it doesn't cost the same as other vehicles in the class either. And there's one other thing about this vehicle that is, I would say, unique, and not necessarily in a good way. But the fact of the matter is, this vehicle is only available with front-wheel drive. You can't get all-wheel drive with it. And the rear suspension is not an ultra-sophisticated multi-length number. It is, in fact, a compound crank, just like the Envista Buick. And what does that mean? Well, it's kind of a torsion bar, basically. But it functions in a way that independent suspensions do, and it's also incredibly simple. So, like so many things on this car, it's very, very straightforward and helps make it over, I would think, over the long term, very economical to own and operate. If you have to fix anything on that rear suspension, it's not exactly complicated. It has your basic coilover spring setup, a coilover shock, I'm sorry, setup in order to suspend each wheel. You got what amounts to a McPherson strut up front, I believe. And then you have your compound crank with your coilovers in back, and that's it. I mean, it's very, very simple in design. I kid the Envista Buick because I think it basically is an Uber car or a rent-a-car that you'd pick up at the airport, because it's kind of, I'd say bare bones, but it's not. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, because you do have wonderful things like adaptive cruise control with steering assist that comes on both of these vehicles, and a very decent stereo system, and naturally all the little bells and whistles like your heating, ventilation, air conditioning system is you can set a temperature on it, and it will automatically keep that temperature in theory. But anyway, let's dig deeper and look at that engine, because that is one of the things that makes this unique in the class, except for its twin, the Buick Envista. Let's look under the hood, shall we? If I was to blindfold a mechanic and walk him up to this car, and then take the blindfold off and ask them, what is this? Is this a Buick or is it a Chevrolet? They would, I think, be stumped initially, because this is the same exact powertrain in both. 1.2 liter inline triple, 3 cylinders, 1, 2, 3, and turbocharging in the back. Intake for your fuel is in the front. Direct injection, by the way. And they're completely, the Envista and the Trax are pretty much completely identical. Same thing. What's your horsepower output? Well, it's 137 horsepower at 5,000 RPM. And that sounds lofty in terms of the RPMs, but that's not bad. For a little engine like this, a triple, it has no problem spinning up to these lofty heights. It's very, very easy to, as far as its response goes, to get the engine to spin that high, because it has light reciprocal weight and only has 3 cylinders. That's basic physics. But it does put out, I believe, 137 horsepower at 5,000 RPM. And anyway, your torque is where it matters on these little engines like this. And this is where your turbocharging comes in very handy, because it boosts the output to 162 pounds of feet, and that's at 2,500 RPM. Now on the Envista, it says that torque peak stretches from 2,500 to 4,000 RPM, and on the spec sheet from Chevrolet, it says just 2,500 RPM. I'm assuming it's probably exactly the same, because there's no obvious notable differences between these two engines. Your air intake, your maw, is right down in here. Sucks the air in, goes down, goes over there. Where's your air box? Just below this, where your air filter is. This then goes down in here and over to the side, and here's your turbocharger. It compresses the air comes around. Actually, I think the air comes underneath here to the intercooler. There's got to be an intercooler, right? I would think so. I don't actually know exactly where it would be. It would probably be down here in the array, which is where, in the front of the car here with your regular radiator, there's probably an intercooler. And then this air ultimately enters right in here. Could that be an intercooler there? Who knows? Here's our plastic intake system of 3 cylinders, where it goes in a direct injection fashion is where the fuel enters the cylinder, which is lower down. And then the air goes in compressed by the turbocharger, and boom, you have compression, you have power. All 137 horses. Now that doesn't sound like much, but this car probably weighs about 3,100 pounds. It doesn't say, Chevrolet does not give this information out as of right now. All I got was a to be determined, but why would it be any different than the Buick? Because they're almost identical. And the Buick weighs 3,100 pounds. So I'd say around 3,000. The Buick is probably a little heavier. It's got something on it somewhere that makes it heavier. But overall, with your front-wheel drive powertrain, you might expect with a peak. You might expect 2 things out of this little turbocharged engine. It would be peaky with a big hit of power, and you might get some torque steer. because it's front wheel drive only. There are no all-wheel drive variants at all on this vehicle. But what you would happily discover is that there really isn't any torque steer. I don't know exactly what they did. Usually if the front drive shafts, one here and one here, are exactly the same length, that dramatically reduces your torque steer. So that may be what's going on, but it's not a problem at all. It just accelerates very nicely. You'll miss that all-wheel drive if you live in a place like we do, which gets snow and in situations where you need. There's one funny thing about this vehicle is you can't get it with all-wheel drive. However, it has very good ground clearance. It has about a little over 7 inches of ground clearance, which is great. So it also has a 6-speed automatic transmission with a manual setting, so you can manually shift it. So all in all, even though it doesn't put out a whole lot of power, it's actually a pretty decent drivetrain, and the mileage figures, as you will see, are very, very good. On a par or better than a lot of vehicles in the class. I still think, just like I did with the Envista, I think this is probably an ideal choice for a fleet vehicle, like for a rent-a-car company, or if you're an Uber driver. I think this might be a real nice vehicle because you have very good rear passenger room, and you have a fair amount of cargo room, which we'll look at closer. You have more cargo room than the Envista. And I'm still trying to figure out exactly how that is, but once we dig around in the back, maybe something will reveal itself. But anyway, there we go. 1.2 liters, 3 cylinders, turbocharging, and that's the way we go down the road. Ah, yes. Now, part of our generous ground clearance, as you can see, on our Trax comes from the addition of these nice big tires. What are they? Well, they're 225/55 R18s. That means 18-inch wheels, which is pretty big for a semi-small car. But it's a good size for this one. It seems to work very, very nicely. And in the braking department, you got plenty of brakes, nothing outstanding, but at the same time, they don't in any way feel inadequate. But with our Goodyear, what are these? These are Assurance. Be assured that they're Goodyears. And these are also mud and snow tires, which everything's practically, they're like all-season tires, and they'll do a good job in light snow and a little bit of mud. But anything beyond that, you're going to need a more, let's say, like an all-terrain tire, which I wouldn't think anyone would ever put on this vehicle. Now, you might very well put snow tires on all 4 wheels. Since you don't have all-wheel drive, that would be a good move if you live in the snow belt. But it seems to be a reasonable, the turning radius and everything on this car is good. So it's a real good, engineering-wise, it's a good size wheel and tire combo for this lovely vehicle. And here's the big question I have. Compared with the Envista, according to the specifications, this rear cargo area is much roomier on the Trax. As you can see, you have your, I'd say 60/40, but that looks like 70/30 to me in your fold down for your rear seats to increase your cargo capacity. And the values of the cargo capacity are as follows. Let's see here. First of all, before I get there, the finish on this is kind of what you'd expect from a economy car. That's a lot of hard plastic right there. And the thing about it is, it looks cheapish, but it's also practical in that it should be fairly durable. And you have a nice flat load area. Now, with the seats configured as they are right now, with the seat backs up, you have a total of 25.6 cubic feet of space. You fold the rear seats down, and that swamps up to 54.1. Now, that's a little bit more than the Envista, and I don't know where this missing space is gone. Maybe the seats are thicker on the Envista. I don't know. It's kind of strange. It's a mystery. Oh, what a mystery this is.
Raptors, what a mystery this is.
So, underneath here, we have our temporary spare tire, Yahoo. There's a lot of space underneath here. You look like, the finish, as you can see, is basic. I think that's the nice way to describe it. Looks like you could almost get a full-size spare back here if you wanted to. And if you were a fleet, like let's say this was a vehicle that a telephone lineman or something was or inspector, I would say. The lineman would have his truck, but an inspector, a supervisor would drive, something like that. You might want a full-size spare, because you'll have to go places sometimes that may be fraught with peril, and you might lose a tire occasionally. But otherwise, for everybody else, that's a real practical situation to have a good temporary spare that looks like it's fairly robust, so that if you're like an Uber driver and you had a flat, you could swap it fast and get your passenger to their destination in short order. Naturally, it's not powered, because that would add a lot of money to it, but the rear gate is got a fairly decent, I'd say it's a great compromise in terms of your liftover height, because some of them are really high these days and some of them are a little low. So depends on what you plan on hauling back there. In terms of suitcases, I'd say it's near perfect height to easily get a big suitcase in and out of the back of the car. So once we get into the interior, you're going to see where this thing really has its ultimate feature, which is that rear seat area, passenger area. But look at, like I said, it looks like this thing's just ready to go down the trail, doesn't it? And you could, provided that the trail is fairly dry and snow free, you could do that. But otherwise, this is more of an around town wagon than a true SUV. And yet it is very attractive. Aha! This beautiful display in the instrument cluster, is it Trax or Envista? Well, it's actually Trax. And it's one of the few differences between the Envista and the Chevy Trax. And it's adjusted here. I learned this from my time with the Envista, which took me forever to learn this. But you push down like this, and there, this one actually works better than the one in the Buick. But there you have three different choices. You can use gauge cluster 1, which is this one. That's the standard, and you have a tachometer. Whee! The tachometer's on there. That's the only one that does have the tachometer. And then if you go down one here, this is just not the most easily fun. There we go. Gauge system 2 is this one here, and the fuel gauge is on the left side, temperature gauge on the right side, and you have a digital speedometer in the middle and sort of an analog sort of speedometer around the outside. Why you have the two of them together, I don't know what the purpose for that is, but that is its purpose. That is the way it is designed, and that's the way it shall be. There we go. And then gauge cluster 3, which is my personal favorite. This one right here, we have the racetrack, and of course there's no tachometer there, but they move some things around. You have your gas gauge on the left-hand side, bottom, and the temperature gauge on the right-hand side, bottom. So there you go. It's flat screen. It doesn't even begin to like simulate a regular analog instrument panel, or instrument cluster, I should say, just because they've just decided not to. Now, another way you can tell right away that this is the Trax as opposed to the Envista is all this trim here. It's got this yellow plastic trim. Now, I'm not sure why yellow was chosen exactly, because the official color of the car is cacti green. But the interior is called jet black with yellow. Well, there's your yellow. There's a watch called a Tudor North Flag that has yellow trim exactly like this on a black face. So maybe that's the thing among designers. Maybe that's a quiet language among designers where they do different things. But here, anyway, we don't have a whole lot of choices as far as what we get on our primary instrument display. Now, one of the areas where you do have a choice is if you press this here, this gives you your access to your trip odometers, which I have one of them being displayed in the lower, and actually it's not, I lie. What's on the gas gauge, below the gas gauge there, is the miles left on that tank, according to current miles per gallon, which is 25.5 miles per gallon. And if you hit this right here, you can reset them, and you can also show it in the instrument cluster if you want. So if I did this right here, show in cluster, there it is. It takes up everything else except the digital speedometer and shows you your trip 1 and trip 2. Why it does that, I'm not entirely sure, but again, that's the choice that it has made. As you can see, it's interesting to note that it's 25.5 miles per gallon, and that's on a tank that's burned about 94 miles on it. And I think that's actually off. I believe this tank probably has a little over 100 miles on it, if I remember right. But there you go. I mean, that's your trip situation, and it's not easy. You can't easily correct it, reset it, or do anything to it without entering this particular sub-menu. So I don't know what to tell you, except that's the way it is. Your fuel economy is overall averaging 24. That's real average for a vehicle of this type, and actually it should be lower than that when you think about it, because we have this tiny 1.2 liter 3-cylinder engine, and it is turbocharged. But 24, 25 is what pretty much all the SUVs in this range get, and they usually have all-wheel drive. This one does not, and you can't get it with all-wheel drive. It's a front-wheel drive vehicle until Chevrolet decides to change a lot of things. I think it wouldn't be an easy thing to put a all-wheel drive system on this, simply because the rear suspension is not one of these. What a lot of vehicle makers have done, especially when it comes to pickup trucks and the front suspension on the pickup, is they have the same suspension for the all-wheel drive and for the two-wheel drive version. So in other words, there's either a drivetrain through that front suspension or not, but the suspension itself is largely unchanged. With this vehicle, the rear suspension is a compound crank unit, which is a type of torsion bar, and they'd have to completely redesign the rear suspension in order to put a drivetrain back there. So that's probably why we're looking at a two-wheel drive vehicle, a front drive, you see. But what else do we have? In our central display is very easy to see as far as the high D definition. I'm sure high D. I think it's high definition, but is very clear and concise. But there's not much to it, and this does not have a navigation system, which is one of the things that keeps the price affordable. Just like our Buick Envista, and this is the Activ ACTIV trim range, which I believe is the top of the line. And while it has a lot of great things on it, like heated seats and adaptive cruise control with steering assist if you want it, that's that button right there, by the way. It doesn't have a whole lot of other stuff on it, including no navigation system whatsoever. And like the rear gate on this vehicle is in fact manual. It's not powered, and that's power rear lift gates are becoming like pretty standard across the board with a lot of vehicles these days that have a rear hatch. But there you go. So all these things are designed to keep the vehicle more affordable. And like I said, if you were a person purchasing an Uber driver vehicle that you're going to use for Uber driving, even though I have no idea what that does to your new car warranty if you decide to drive it as an Uber car, that's a whole different area that I'm not vested with the latest information about that. Initially, when these car sharing services started, you were pretty much violating if you took money from people to drive them around, you lost your warranty, period, because it then became a commercial vehicle. So you'll have to look into that. If you were thinking about buying either the Trax or the Envista for an Uber car, you need to look into the warranty situation, because they may have something, who knows, they may have something set up that they can set up just for people that do that. But they usually will knock out big chunks of your warranty like they used to with any pickup truck that was used. You put a snowplow on the front of it. It used to basically destroy your drivetrain warranty. But I don't know, nowadays I don't know if that's still the case. Maybe they've come up with something. But anyway, the thing that's very familiar and probably the most conventional thing on the car is the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning service, which has an automatic mode. It's now set on 70 degrees. It's one zone only. It doesn't have two different zones here. And it seems to work pretty well about keeping the temperature where you set it. And the temperature where it's set seems to be fairly accurate to me. So I've had it on 70 most of the time, even though that's it's a little warmer than I usually have it, but it's been very cold outside. Matter of fact, it's 34 right now, which is not freezing, but which is chilly. But there you go. Now, directly below this, we have our QI system for our cell phone. Do I have my cell phone with me? No, I don't have it with me. But anyway, I've had excellent luck with that, charging my cell phone, even though it's in a case, which is always important. And just above here, USB-C, USB-A, and a power port, 12-volt power port right there. All very convenient, very easy to get to. This is for turning off your engine auto stop and start. Now on this vehicle, just like the Envista, because it's the same drivetrain, it seems to be it's using just a conventional starter to start the engine, and it does fine, but it's not as smooth as some other vehicles in terms of the auto start and start. And if you don't like it at all, bang, you can just turn it off just like that. Now your auto stop is off. So, and this, like I mentioned, is your lane keeping, or your yang keeping if you live in Yugoslavia, and that seems to work fairly well. It's not horrifically bad as so many of these systems were when they were initially launched a few years ago. They've gotten better and better and better. You have a camera right up in here, in this cluster here, it's facing out that way, and it seems to work fairly well as long as it can see the lanes and you have clearly delineated painted lanes for it to see. It seems to guide the car fairly nicely. It's kind of a supplement. It's kind of like only when when you screw up more than, it won't drive the car for you. It's not like Super Cruise Junior, which is the Super Cruise, of course, being the GM system that's on a lot of their upscale vehicles that will completely steer the car for you. This is more just to keep you out of trouble if it detects you're going way off the road or you're dramatically heading towards going off the road, then it will activate. So good safety feature if you're a weavy person. If you're a weaver, one of the weavers, like Dennis Weaver, McLeod. Yeah, you have to be really, really old to remember that. Okay, our shifter, a very conventional shifter, but it's one of these shifters like was so popular for a long time with Ford vehicles, still is, I believe, where if you go straight back, you're going to end up in low, which is also your manual setting, and you have, I believe, 6 forward speeds, plus and minus on that little thumb button right there. So, and it seems to work reasonably well for manual driving, but it's completely mechanical here. Whether or not it's electronic ultimately, probably. The linkage may just be mechanical at this end and then go into a box that then signals the transmission what gear you're supposed to be in. That's what is coming more and more common also. But some cars do still have a mechanical link that goes directly onto the transmission, which is very, very reliable. But the electronic side of things so far is proved to be very reliable too. So you have that choice. Now then, what do we have back here? We have a little console. It's very deep, actually. You can get quite a bit of stuff in there. You could fit a full-size flashlight, all kinds of stuff. It's not very big in terms of area here, but it is very deep, and that is good for your storage. The glove box is also very, very roomy. You could get a tablet computer in there, provided it's not too awfully big. Absolutely. So there's good storage there. And your cup holders here. And your cup holders in the door there. And, what's this? Look at this nice yellow trim. This is part of our yellow trim system. And there's our little Activ to denote the Activ trim line. These seats are fairly flat. They don't have the world's greatest side bolsters for aggressive driving. However, the seats are pretty comfortable. And I believe this is leather material. This is not a man-made material. I believe it. Let's have a look. Are we leather? Interior, heated seats. So much of the time it doesn't tell you. Oh, wait. Evotex seating material. How about that? So it's one of the Tex groups, which is a textile, which seems like leather. I swear, this stuff on these vehicles now that is not leather but looks like leather, you'd swear it was leather. but it's actually like a very heavy vinyl. It's good stuff. It's perforated here for your comfort, and it seems like it's really, really durable, and that's one of the nicest things about it. But it's not like it's uncomfortable either. It's very comfortable. I give the seats good marks on this. I'd like a little bit more in the side bolster department, but otherwise, it does well. These are nice. These are good seats. Now, how about our map lights? Well, we don't really have them. Now, there's one central dome light, and that's it. And I miss map lights. Got your vanity mirror, but I'm a map light person. I find myself using them at night when I'm parked doing something all the time. So I personally would miss that, but you may have no need for such map lights. All right, let's look out back. Good to have that vehicle back right there. A tree fell on it. That was expensive for the insurance company. Oh, look at all the stuff. Much like here's where we get crazy. Here's where we get mad. But whatever, I don't know why exactly. This is for your snow removal. Right. Oop, I'm sorry. This is for your snow removal. That's just the front of the car. Ooh, USB-A, USB-C. We have a totally flat floor, which again, they would have to re-engineer the floor pan on this car if they were going to run a drive shaft from the drivetrain back to the rear wheels for a rear drive system for all-wheel drive. So that's another reason why it doesn't have it. But like the Envista, this car has excellent rear seat room. That's why I keep saying it'd be a good Uber car, just because you could get two people back here very comfortably. And they have plenty of leg room and plenty of foot room. So, and the seats themselves are very good. They're made out of that same durable material, textile material. And let's see, check our windows out here. They go down 100%. Very good. That's good for all kinds of things like dogs and anything. You have a cup holder here. Do we have a nice, no, we don't. What we have is a 60-40 split here on our seats, but no armrest and no map lights. You just have a central dome that's on or off. On or door, I should say. But that's all you have. I mean, these are all money-saving features to help make this car more affordable for people. On one side, you do have a pocket that's kind of tight. You could get a magazine in there, a tablet computer. That would be kind of a tight fit back here. But otherwise, now here's the weird part about all this. This vehicle has more cargo room, according to GM's own information, like many cubic feet more cargo room when the seats are folded down and when they're folded up compared with the Buick. Now, what's the difference? I have no idea. It's possible that the Buick has a little bit more. I'll see if I can't figure this out. It's possible that the Buick has a little bit more rear seat room by moving the seat, possibly mounting it a little further back. I have no idea, but I was very taken by the fact that there were completely different values for your rear cargo space. So we'll see. But if you're a human and you have the seats deployed as they are now with the 60-40 seat backs in the upright position, it's very comfortable. It would, like I say, especially be good for a ride-sharing situation. Or I mentioned this before with the Envista, in that it would be a good rent-a-car too, because it has everything that a rent-a-car company would want. It's very simple, it's affordable, it's straightforward, it's basic transportation, but it does have some nice features to it. But most importantly, it has plenty of room for humans. So that's the number one feature of this car. There's two big pluses to this vehicle. One is it's very affordable, and two, it has a lot of room in it. And it drives fine. I mean, the thing that gets me about that little 1.2 liter engine is that it gets out of its way pretty nicely, as you'll see. It's fine. It's a good little engine, but you're not really gaining a whole hell of a lot in terms of fuel economy with it. So why they go to the complexity of a 1.2 liter inline triple that's turbocharged as opposed to just a regularly aspirated 2.5 liter four cylinder, because because I feel like the performance would be about the same, including the gas mileage, if that's what they decide to do. But they're the engineers. They know what they're doing. So I will willing to bet money that the emissions on this car with this 1.2 liter triple is probably a lot lower than the emissions from a four-cylinder that's not turbocharged. Turbocharging does help with your emissions. I need to point that out because that's one reason so many companies, people think it's all about mileage, and it really isn't. It's I was told by somebody at Toyota, I believe it was Toyota, the turbocharging is becoming a thing because it's all about emissions. It's a much cleaner, lower emissions vehicle if it has turbocharging. So there you go. But that's our interior of our Activ Trax. This is not an Envista. This is a Chevy. And it's a lot less expensive than the Envista, and yet it deserves a lot. It delivers a lot of the same everything. Everybody's talking at me. I don't hear a word they're saying. True enough. Well, look at all this mud and stuff. We're going to give it the test. Our non-all-wheel drive test up this rugged trail here. There's a lot of rocks. It's a real mess right now, actually. But we'll see how she does. Trax. Well, they call it Trax. Wouldn't you think that would indicate that there is an all-wheel drive version available? No, it doesn't. It's just a name. It does, of course, have a limited, well, not limited slip, but automatic traction control. And it works reasonably well. See, we got right up there, no problem. My experience with it in the snow has been okay, but it hasn't been in the real snow. It's been in what we will define as light snow. Whee! Boy, listen to all that mud. You can tell there's not a whole lot. And you know, this is one of the differences, I believe, between the Chevy Trax and the Buick Envista, is there's a little more insulation to make the Envista a little bit quieter, especially in terms of road noise. But I cannot verify that right off the bat. I believe that to be true, though. It's not a dramatic difference. That's the one thing you should remember, because obviously if you're looking at these two vehicles, you're going to save money if you get the Trax, because they come fairly... This is the Activ model. That's with a V, no E at the end there. Activ. So like it has a French name, it's built in South Korea with a Mexican engine and designed in the United States for sale here. But I'm telling you, I could see them selling this all over the world as a fleet vehicle, Uber, and whatever service you may have that you'd like, instead of forking out the dough to get an actual cab with a professional driver, if that's if you prefer the you know, the whatever you call it. I forget what it's called. Ride shearing. No, that's in Australia. That's the sheep truck. Well, anyway, the car is tall because it looks like an SUV and it's sold as an SUV. But it doesn't feel tippy. It doesn't feel overly... Neither this or the Buick do. They actually handle very nicely. Nothing outstanding, but at the same time, nothing bad. It's like that compound crank rear suspension. It's very simple, but it works fine for most... Yeah, I mean, it depends on what your needs are. If you really want the latest in terms of performance, you want like a really nice multi-link setup found on a much more expensive type of vehicle. This is much more rudimentary, and yet it works fine. It's like I still say, and I don't know if I'm alone on this or not, probably, but there's not a whole hell of a lot of difference between a modern pickup truck that has coil rear springs and leaf rear springs. In terms of ride quality, I've never noticed this big difference that everyone talks about, and I've driven a lot of them. And it doesn't seem like the ride quality
is a big enough improvement with coil springs on the rear axle over leaf springs, considering the added complexity and cost of production. That's just my opinion. That's why kudos to everybody who doesn't go to coil rear springs, because I think they're doing something smart. And leaf springs have come a long way too. So just like this compound crank, the coil springs and the shock absorbers are tuned such that it just works well. And I can't tell you offhand what the tire wear situation is, but I'm willing to bet that there's nothing overly noticeable about how the rear tires wear. A compound crank or even just a torsion beam rear suspension is not going to locate the tires with the degree of precision that a multi-link is. And when you have the tires better located, they tend to wear more evenly over time. But if you rotate your tires like you should about every 5,000 miles, you're not going to notice anything. I think you're going to be just fine. And all those wheels have to do is hold up the rear of the car. They don't have to steer. They don't have to provide propulsion. They don't have to do anything. So that's another reason why the suspension is so simple, is because it has very little to do other than just suspend. And, you know, if you're a singer and you don't have to play, you know, like the guitar or the fiddle or some instrument of some sort, sit at the keyboards and play the instrument and sing, all you do is sing, then it's much easier and you can be much more rudimentary of a person. I would never say that to Frank Sinatra if he were alive, because he'd punch me in the mouth. Shut up, kid. I could tell you a Frank Sinatra story, but I'm not going to right now. But there was only one of those, that's for sure. And what a voice. My God, what a voice the guy had. So anyway, here we go up the hill. And power's good. You know, it's perfectly adequate. I don't do a lot in terms of 0 to 60 tests. I used to years ago. I don't anymore. And there's a real important reason why. It's one of these things, the same thing with braking tests, that it is so dependent upon the conditions being the same between vehicles in order to give you a real accurate assessment of stopping distances. Because the surface of depending on the ambient temperature, and provided that you do the test on the same road every time, the condition of the road itself and everything else changes over time, and can usually, it's not when it changes, it's not too much of a benefit to the braking system, because it all comes down to traction, and that of course comes down to what kind of tires you have. And a lot of time manufacturers, depending on what part of the country the vehicle is sold in, it'll have different tires on it. And the more multi-terrain or all-season type of tire you have, the less the dry stopping, the longer the dry stopping distance. Not dramatically, but that tends to be the way it is. The best tires of all on dry pavement in terms of stopping are summer tires, or performance summer tires and that kind of thing. So you got that, you got ambient temperature, you got wind, you got everything else, and it can dramatically change depending on the vehicle, your 0 to 60 times. And the same thing with braking. So what I do instead is I will tell you with any vehicle I test if it is a whole lot faster or a whole lot slower than most of the vehicles in class. That's just the way. The fact of the matter is, I believe this very strongly, that most vehicles now, the acceleration is perfectly adequate. There was a time years ago where that was not always the case. Some vehicles were pretty slow. And when you're getting like merging out in Los Angeles, which I used to have to do, although I was usually on a motorcycle, I drove my car out there a lot too. You have plenty of power with the modern vehicles to get on if you're a reasonably intelligent driver. You can get up to speed just fine. You can also do your 50 to 70 passing. You can do it fine. You have to plan ahead more if you're not testing like a Corvette or a Dodge Challenger or something like that. Yeah, they'll get you to speed much faster. Duh. But in general, the cross-section of cars, pickups, SUVs, they're all in the same basic category of 0 to 60 times, and they're perfectly adequate. It changes quite a bit, and you won't know this until you're in the circumstance, but the more you load them up, they tend to slow down, and the less horsepower that you have to start with, and torque in particular, the vehicle will slow down 0 to 60 quite a bit if you have like 4 people in it as opposed to just a driver. So, you know, this is all common sense stuff. But that's why I don't bother to do all that testing, because I feel like it's slightly misleading, because I don't feel like I can duplicate the conditions accurately enough to give you good comparison numbers. But instead, it's a driving impression. And in the case of this car, I'm very surprised that just with a wee little 137 horsepower, it gets along just fine. Now, what are we getting in terms of our gas mileage? This, by the way, this is a common fault, I don't know, something I don't like about this vehicle. And the same thing with the Envista is sometimes you have to mash and mash and mash and mash at the touch screen to get it to do its thing. I'm not real sure why that is. And simplicity is a wonderful thing. It really, really is. Because not only does it eliminate potential problems, but it makes problems easier to diagnose when you have things that you know it can't be. I know for a fact I'm having zero trouble with my rear drivetrain because there is no rear drivetrain. So that's your that's a feature, not a bug. I'll put it that way. I'm being very nice to the fact that I think it's ridiculous you can't get this with all-wheel drive. But this is my way of justifying it. The simplicity is worth your time. Worth looking into this. And let's face it, most of you listening to me right now probably can get along fine with a two-wheel drive car. Probably. Then there's you, and you need all-wheel drive, but these other people, they don't require it. And so saith the GM division. Well, I kind of screwed up something here. This is in fact supposed to be a movie, but it's not right here. But this is your complex crank rear suspension, which is very, very simple. It's basically just a torsion bar with coils on either side. But the fact is, it rides very, very well and delivers very sure handling. And best of all, it's incredibly simple. It's a very rudimentary but effective rear suspension. I did say it had coil over shock rear suspension, but it doesn't. It's the shock absorber is separate. So, what do we have to say about our 2024 Trax Activ model? Well, it has a base price of $23,900, and with our option package, including the sunroof package and the driver confidence package, our MSRP came to $26,685. It also gets very, very good mileage. I got about right around 27, which was good considering the conditions I was driving. So you have what is a true economy car in that it is very economical to operate, but it has a lot of room in it. It's very comfortable and it drives quite well. And when you get right down to it, it's one of the few bargains that we have out there. And like I said, if you're a driver of an Uber, this might be your ride. So take care, everybody. Be careful out there, and we'll see you next time.
Do whatever the tube tells you. You dress like the tube. You eat like the tube. You raise your children like the tube. You even think like the tube. This is mass madness, you maniacs. In God's name, you people are the real thing. We are the illusion.